I was 33 years old when my own mother stood in the kitchen of the house I had been holding together for 3 years and told me I needed to leave. She didn't hesitate. She didn't soften it. She folded her arms like she had practiced the stance, looked me straight in the eye, and said my brother was moving in with his 3 kids, so I had to move out by the weekend. For a second, I honestly thought it was a joke. I even laughed, but she didn't. Her smile was thin, cold. And then she called me a parasite. A parasite. After the mortgage payments I covered when her savings ran dry. After the furnace I replaced in the dead of winter. After the emergency rooms, the tax notices, the quiet sacrifices no one clapped for. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the woman I had rearranged my entire future for, and realized something devastatingly simple. I had been good enough to rescue her life, but not important enough to keep a place in it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was just one call. Then I saw the screen. 53 missed calls. My mother. Derek. My mother again. Derek again. Even a few unknown numbers I could only assume were Ron trying from someone else's phone. The same people who had calmly informed me that I was no longer needed were suddenly desperate to reach me. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a cruel dinner conversation. Something had shifted. Something they hadn't planned for. The confidence they wore the night before, the certainty that I would quietly pack up and disappear, was gone. In its place was panic. Real panic. I hadn't answered a single call yet, but the silence I gave them was louder than any argument I could have made. Whatever was happening back at that house, it was big enough to crack their control. And for the first time since being called a parasite, I felt something unfamiliar rising in me. Not grief, not rage, clarity. 3 years earlier, before anyone rewrote me into a burden, I had a small 1-bedroom apartment across town and a life that finally felt steady. I worked as an operations coordinator for a medical supply company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I had routines, savings, a quiet plan to one day build a financial organizing service for women trying to rebuild after divorce or debt. For the first time, my future felt like something I was designing on purpose. Then, my father died. One week, he was arguing with me about whether I changed the oil in my car on time. The next, I was standing in a black dress beside a casket, watching my mother age 10 years and 10 days. After the funeral, the house began unraveling almost as quickly as she did. Bills piled up unopened on the kitchen counter. She forgot her medication. The mortgage slipped behind. The furnace made a grinding sound that no one had money to fix. Property tax notices arrived in red envelopes that felt like threats. My brother called twice, said he was sorry, said things were complicated. Then he disappeared back into his own life. I was the one who stayed. I gave up my lease, packed my apartment into storage, moved back into my childhood bedroom, telling myself it would be temporary, just a few months until she stabilized. That was the lie I needed to believe, because the truth was heavier. Once I stepped back into that house, my life reorganized itself around keeping it standing. I became the system, the alarm clock for her medication, the one who handled utilities, repairs, insurance paperwork, emergency plumbing in winter, and roof leaks in spring. I paid what she couldn't. I postponed what I wanted. And at the time, I didn't resent it. I thought this was love. I thought sacrifice guaranteed security. If I'm honest, the betrayal didn't begin at that dinner table. It started months earlier. In small shifts I kept excusing because I was tired and still wanted to believe the best about my family. Derek had always been the son people forgave before he even failed. Charming when he needed something, elusive when responsibility showed up. He drifted between cities, jobs, relationships, always one apology away from another reset. My mother treated him like the world had been unfair to him, like the rest of us were supposed to cushion whatever fall came next. So when she began smiling at her phone more often, stepping into the laundry room to take private calls, and asking oddly specific questions about my work schedule. I noticed. I just didn't understand the pattern yet. Around the same time, Ron Mercer started appearing more frequently, a man from her church group. Polite in public, smug in private. He carried himself like someone quietly evaluating whether he could rearrange the furniture without being challenged. At dinner, he would ask if I had ever considered getting back out on my own. He'd laugh and say it must be nice having a built-in safety net. I told myself I could tolerate him if he made her happy. But my mother began changing around him, sharper, more critical. The kitchen I cleaned wasn't clean enough. The groceries I bought weren't what she would have chosen. The house I'd been financially maintaining for years slowly transformed, in her new narrative, into a place where I had grown too comfortable. Then came the physical clues. School enrollment forms appeared briefly on the dining table and vanished when I walked in. The garage was suddenly cleared out for no reason. 3 twin mattresses were delivered one Friday afternoon while I was still at work. When I asked about them, she said the church was donating items and changed the subject. One evening, I found 2 boxes of my winter clothes taped shut near the basement stairs. She said she was helping me organize. Another night, passing by the hallway, I heard her laughing softly into the phone. No, she still has no idea. That sentence lodged inside me like glass. Maya, my best friend, sensed it before I admitted it. Over coffee, she said, "Naomi, you're acting like someone who knows a storm is coming but keeps calling it wind." I laughed it off. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but deep down, I had already started bracing. The real crack came when my mother casually asked if I could clear out my bedroom closet soon because we might need the space for guests. Guests. Not family. Not children. Guests. The room I had moved back into to rebuild her stability. The room I'd slept in after emergency hospital visits and long work days. The room tied to 3 years of postponed dreams, reduced to storage flexibility. Even then, I told myself she wouldn't truly humiliate me, that there were lines she wouldn't cross. What I didn't understand yet was that she had already crossed them in her mind. Psychologically, I was still operating under an old belief that consistent sacrifice earns security, that if you are dependable enough, patient enough, useful enough, you become irreplaceable. But in that house, my dependability had quietly turned into invisibility. The more stable I made everything, the easier it became to imagine I wasn't essential. And that was the mechanism I failed to see. I believed I was building equity, emotional and practical. My mother, influenced by guilt, favoritism, and perhaps Ron's subtle commentary, had started reframing my presence as dependency instead of contribution. It's a subtle but powerful shift. When someone benefits from your labor long enough, they can begin to rewrite the story so they remain generous and you become excessive, so they are helping you instead of you helping them. That psychological rewrite doesn't happen overnight. It happens in quiet revisions, in private conversations, in repeated narratives told often enough to feel true. By the time that dinner happened, she wasn't improvising. She had already convinced herself that I had overstayed something that was never mine. And I, still clinging to the belief that love guarantees fairness, had not yet realized I was the only one playing by that rule.
The night everything finally surfaced started with pot roast. That should have been my first warning. My mother only cooked like that when she needed control over a conversation. The mashed potatoes were whipped the way my father used to like them. The good plates were set out. There was even a bottle of wine open on a weeknight. Ron hovered nearby, pretending to help, but mostly observing. It felt staged the moment I walked in. For the first 10 minutes, it was small talk, artificial, too careful. My mother's smile stretched just slightly too tight across her face. Then she set her fork down and said Derek was moving back. I froze, but not in anger, in calculation. She explained he'd been struggling. Things had fallen apart. He was bringing the kids. They needed stability. That part alone didn't upset me. I was already rearranging space in my head. The guest room could work. Maybe we could convert the office temporarily. I was still solving logistics when she added the sentence that changed everything. The children needed more space. And since I was grown and capable, I would need to move out by the weekend. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain rejected it. I asked if she was joking. She smiled lightly. No, I'm serious. I reminded her, calm at first, that I had been paying most of the bills. When the furnace died in January, I paid for it. When the roof leaked, I paid. When the property taxes came in overdue, I covered them. I reminded her Derek wasn't there during hospital visits, during dizzy spells, during the months she couldn't sleep without crying. She didn't look ashamed. She looked irritated. "You act like helping your family bought you ownership," she said. "No," I replied. "I act like being treated fairly should come with not being thrown out of the house I helped keep standing." That's when her face changed. All softness disappeared. She leaned forward and called me a parasite. She said I had stayed too long, taken too much, built my identity around clinging to a temporary arrangement. She said Derek needed her more right now. The children mattered more. It wasn't healthy for me to keep hanging on. Ron added quietly, "Maybe this is the push you need." And in that moment, something inside me went very still. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. This wasn't impulsive. This was rehearsed. The dinner, the language, the certainty, they had already decided who I was in this new story. Not the daughter who rebuilt the house. Not the woman who kept it solvent. The obstacle. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't negotiate for extra days. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out. I drove until I couldn't see our street anymore and parked outside a 24-hour grocery store. I sat in the dark with both hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand how 3 years of steady loyalty could be erased in a single sentence. Then I checked my phone. One text from my mother. "Please don't be dramatic. We can discuss logistics tomorrow." Logistics. That was the word she chose for dismantling my life and handing my place to someone who hadn't lifted a finger to build it. That was the moment I stopped trying to be understood and started paying attention.
By the time I walked back into that house later that night, I was no longer confused. I was alert. The house was quiet, but once I stopped looking at it like a daughter and started looking at it like someone being removed, the evidence was everywhere. 2 of my father's framed photos had been taken down from the hallway and leaned against the laundry room wall. The linen closet was half emptied. My bedroom door was wide open, and a box of my shoes had already been pushed into the hallway, as if momentum alone could make me disappear. I sat on my bed, opened my laptop, and decided that before I cried again, I was going to find out how long this had been planned. The answer came fast. The joint household account I used to manage bills showed a $4,000 withdrawal made by my mother 2 days earlier. That money wasn't random. It was mostly funds I had transferred over time for property taxes and emergency repairs. I kept scrolling. There were pending charges at a furniture store, a delivery confirmation for bunk beds, payment holds that lined up perfectly with the twin mattresses I'd seen arrive. Then I checked the shared desktop email account she sometimes used. There it was. An email thread between my mother, Derek, and a church friend. The subject line, room setup. They discussed timing, whether it would be easier if I were at work when the kids arrived, how awkward it might be if Naomi makes a scene. One message from Derek read, "Just make sure she's out before we get there. I don't want the kids around all that tension." My mother replied, "Once she's finally out, the house can feel like family again." Family again. I read that sentence 3 times. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. I wasn't being impulsively pushed out. I was being strategically replaced. The next morning, instead of panicking, I called Sophie Lane, an attorney I knew from college who handled tenant and property disputes. I laid everything out, 3 years of documented payments, proof of residency, repair invoices, the account withdrawal, the emails. She listened carefully. Then she said something no one in that house expected me to know. Legally, I wasn't just a daughter sleeping in a spare room. I was an established resident with tenant protections. My mother could not remove me without formal notice. My financial contributions created leverage, especially documented contributions tied to maintenance and mortgage gaps. Sophie didn't promise revenge. She gave me structure, language, process, options. From her office, I called Maya. By that afternoon, I had viewed a small 1-bedroom apartment 10 minutes from my job. The kitchen lighting was terrible. The hardwood floors were worn, but it felt clean in a way that had nothing to do with surfaces. It felt honest. I signed the lease that day. The rest of the week, I became someone my family had never bothered to imagine. Quiet, methodical, precise.
I opened a new bank account and moved my personal funds. I printed every receipt, repairs, tax payments, utilities, transfers. I packed in layers, taking small loads after work so nothing looked suspicious. At home, I acted agreeable. I told my mother I was looking at options. I let them believe panic had made me passive. They thought I was overwhelmed. What they didn't realize was that I had already stopped playing defense. I was building a position, and by the time Derek's plane landed, everything was ready.
Friday morning arrived with artificial calm. My mother left early to meet Derek and the kids at the airport. Before walking out, she paused in the kitchen and reminded me, gently, almost patiently, that she expected most of my things gone before they returned. The tone of someone who believed the outcome was already secured. I remember looking at her over the rim of my coffee mug and realizing something with startling clarity. She still thought she was in control. The second her car disappeared down the street, I began. At 9:30, the locksmith I had scheduled 2 days earlier arrived. By 11, every exterior lock on the house had been replaced. I didn't damage anything. I didn't storm through rooms. I simply secured what I legally had the right to secure. While he worked, Maya and my coworker Julian helped me remove the last of my furniture and the boxes I had intentionally left behind to avoid suspicion. I took only what was mine, nothing more. Then I called the utility companies and removed my name from every account I had been managing. I didn't shut anything off illegally. I documented transfer dates, final balances, confirmation numbers. For 3 years, I had been the invisible system keeping that house comfortable. That morning, I ended the system. On the kitchen table, I left a folder, copies of bank transfers, repair invoices, tax payments, proof of residency, a formal letter from Sophie outlining my legal standing and request for reimbursement negotiations. On top of it, I wrote one sentence by hand. Since I was good enough to pay for this house, I was good enough to be treated lawfully. By 12:15, I was standing in my new apartment surrounded by boxes, eating crackers over the sink because I was too wired to sit down. At 12:38, the first call came. Then another. Then 6 texts in under 2 minutes. By 1, my phone screen looked frantic. By the next morning, there were 53 missed calls. That was when I understood something fully, not just intellectually, but physically. I had never been the burden. I had been the foundation. And the moment I stepped away, the weight shifted back to the people who had placed it there. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. And not in the dramatic, cinematic way people imagine after revenge. It was quieter than that. Cleaner. Mine. The apartment with the terrible kitchen lighting became my favorite place in the world. I stopped apologizing for loving it. I stopped explaining why I needed it. I slept through the night. I accepted the promotion I would have turned down a year earlier because no one needed me on standby anymore. With the extra income, I officially launched the financial organizing service I had once only talked about in cautious, hypothetical sentences. Now it was real. Clients, calendars, contracts, women sitting across from me saying, I didn't realize how much I was carrying until I saw it on paper. And every time I helped someone untangle debt, document contributions, or set boundaries around shared finances, I wasn't just helping them. I was reinforcing what I had learned the hard way. Love is not proven by how much you endure in silence. It is proven by mutual respect, by accountability, by fairness. My family had to adjust to life without my invisible labor. Bills became louder when no one quietly absorbed them. Responsibilities became heavier when no one preemptively handled them. And for the first time, that weight was not mine. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my old role, the dependable one, the fixer, the quiet absorber of chaos, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, are you being valued or just being relied on? If this story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, tell me where you're watching from. I want you to know you're not alone in that choice. Because rebuilding your life isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to finally build it for yourself.
The consequences didn't explode overnight. They unfolded slowly, exactly the way real life does when one dependable person steps away.
Derek didn't transform into a responsible father just because he had a roof over his head again. He drifted between short-term jobs, complained about expenses, and underestimated how much daily life actually costs when no one else is quietly covering the gaps. 3 children meant groceries disappearing faster, school forms needing signatures, doctor appointments, laundry piling high. The kind of logistics I used to handle without being asked. Ron, without the comfort of my financial structure beneath him, became less present. It's easy to offer opinions when someone else is funding stability, harder when stability demands participation. My mother and I saw each other once, months later, at a pharmacy. She looked tired, smaller somehow. She told me my father would have been proud that I built something of my own. It didn't erase anything, but it confirmed something important. She finally saw me, not as a convenience, not as a placeholder, but as someone who had walked away and survived.
These days, my life isn't perfect. The kitchen light is still too dim. The hardwood floors still creak. But every inch of it belongs to me. I built it without begging to stay where I wasn't respected. I built it after being called a parasite by people who had quietly depended on my stability for years. And what I know now is this: your worth is not measured by how useful you are to those who would replace you the moment someone louder arrives. Your worth lives in your boundaries, in your choices, in your willingness to protect your own future, even when the people hurting you share your last name. Love should never require you to shrink, to disappear, or to accept injustice in exchange for belonging. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that being needed is not the same as being valued. And if you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, tell me what that moment taught you.